Did I forget to add a thumbnail? Whoops. Good morning, y'all. Good morning. Let me go ahead and run the... And good morning. So, how you doing?
Man, I'm a little tired. I attempted to take pictures of the supermoon last night and learned...
You said attempted.
Well, I took pictures of the moon, and I took pictures of the moon that was the supermoon, and I actually think that I got some successful pictures, but I learned... And of course, I've never taken pictures of a supermoon before, so I learned. You're actually better off being ready to go the second moonrise begins, because that's when it's the biggest in the sky and it's all the different colors.
Mm-hmm.
It looks very much like just a regular moon once it gets to be like 11 o'clock and it's way high up in the sky.
Gotcha.
So, but it's fine. Still a little tired, but
so you didn't just go ahead and try again at like 5?
No.
Kind of get the other side of the supermoon.
I thought about it, but it was one of those things where it was like, yeah.
but sleep is good.
Yeah. And I learned, and there's another one in this hemisphere in like 9 years. And I promise I won't make that mistake in 9 years from now.
I suspect we can be prepared over that timeline. So, this morning, we are going to talk about the newest Trump indictment. And we're going to talk about it in a very particular context. And to that end, I want to start with something that is not actually directly, but totally related. Here it is. The arrest of a street preacher. So I want you to watch carefully. This guy's out here preaching. And that's the moment right there. Okay. I don't care what this unarmed citizen is doing. The argument that the police are making here is that he's not allowed to use the amplifier on the sidewalk, and that is itself reason enough to suppress his freedom of speech. What this person is doing is speaking on a public sidewalk, right? The law not only fails to forbid this, the law is explicitly, by the First Amendment, excluded, forbidden from preventing this. Now, the argument gets a little fuzzy when you start talking about the use of an amplifier, which I might add is a major habit of leftist protesters with great frequency. and they go unmarred over it. In this case, however, you see that as the police approach, they don't walk up and introduce themselves and ask politely. There's no attempt to deal with the citizen in a respectful and courteous way. No. The police interaction begins without preamble with a physical assault of the citizen. Given everything else I just said about the leftist protesters, BLM and the like, using amplification in the way that they do, what's happening here is his speech is being restricted based on the content of the speech. Now, and Dad, I'm actually with you there. Amplifying is disturbing the peace to a point. Now, it's also true that they're not out there pulling over people with loud stereos. So, as far as the law is concerned, this is targeted based on the content. If these officers were enforcing law evenly and arresting people with politically correct messages like you should all be sacrificing your children to Moloch or the like, then that might be a different question. But in this case, there is good reason to believe that his speech is being censored based on its content, which is explicitly forbidden by the law. Selective enforcement is a crime, right? It's one thing for discretion to not enforce petty law. It is quite another thing for discretion to selectively determine that one political opinion is expressible and another is not. And then on top of that, they began the interaction, and this is the biggest thing for me, is they began the interaction by simply assaulting the kid. They just walked up and put hands on him, grabbed him. I mean, this is assault. This is kidnapping. What these armed men are doing is a federal crime. And they've done it on camera. There's no arguing the facts of the case. Armed men assaulted a citizen without cause and restricted his expression of rights. Now, again, the amplifier makes it a little bit fuzzy. Danny points out the amplifier bullhorn is legal in Georgia, and that's something that is we're actually certain of because it came up last year when we were doing the protests about the property tax increases in Rockdale County. Danny had to do the research, and he brought out the bullhorn, and we made use of that. And in that case, we made use of the bullhorn during the protest, and then after the protest, the relevant officials, including some police officers, came out and used a loudspeaker to address the assembled crowd as well. And that there again, if it is lawful and tolerable for public servants to use amplified speech in order to communicate, then it certainly must be lawful for citizens who have the First Amendment right of expression to do likewise. I bring this one up to begin with because we're about to talk about the new indictment against Donald Trump. The new indictment alleges that Donald Trump engaged in 3 separate conspiracies, and it refuses to charge any of the things that they want you to believe he's being charged with. So instead of him being charged with things like trying to overturn the election, he's being charged as a conspirator with several unnamed co-conspirators in a conspiracy to defraud the American people. And when you read the indictment, the unnamed co-conspirators are Donald Trump's legal team and political appointees and political supporters who offered advice based on their perception of the 2020 election. So let's pretend for just a moment that there's nothing suspicious that happened in 2020 and that no reasonable person could believe Even if you know in your heart that it wasn't stolen, no reasonable person could believe that there was anything suspicious or unusual. And that language right there, unusual, is extremely important to this whole conversation, because the fact is this: we did not know who won the election the day after the election. And I dare say that none of you watching the show today can name a time when that was the case. The closest there is to an exception, can name a time in your living memory where that was the case. The closest exception was the Hanging Chad scandal, where the election was in fact called, and then lawsuits went on, which drug out the possibility that that result might change based on the outcome of those lawsuits. But an outcome was determined and then questioned. The outcome was not delayed for weeks. The outcome was not uncertain insofar as there was a count. The count said Bush won. The claim was challenged in court. But that's a very different thing than to say, well, we're still counting a week later. It's a very different thing than for a city in question, right? Because remember, what is it, Fannie Mae in Atlanta is still trying to put together another indictment to chase Trump over conversations in Georgia. And let's never forget that they shut down the polls in the middle of the night, and suddenly, magically, Joe Biden was ahead in the polls. And then we found out almost immediately, just within a couple of days, that when they shut down the counting facility, they lied about there being a water main burst in order to shut it down. Now, I don't know why a person might attempt to defraud the citizens on the question of whether or not public facilities were damaged or required emergency maintenance. I don't know why a person would lie about that, other than the obvious reason. You've got that I'm waiting patiently for Lowry to shut up face.
Is that what that face is?
It is. They're familiar with it.
Oh, okay. Maybe I just need more coffee. So,
I kind of expected you to interject by now. I applaud your patience.
Yeah, man, that water main, I still remember the water main break.
We knew it was bullshit when it happened. Mm-hmm. Or we said it was bullshit before we had proof that it was bullshit, because it just smelled like bullshit.
Anyhow, look, here's the thing. There are two views. Well, okay, there are three views on what happened in 2020. Of course, the one view is Joe Biden got the most votes ever, and there was nothing funny about it whatsoever. There's the what I'll refer to as the Alex Jones view, and then what I'll refer to as the Eric Erickson view. The Alex Jones view is obvious. The Eric Erickson view is basically that it's not so much that 2020 was stolen directly, but rather the Democrats caught us sleeping. They caught us with their pants down. They out-lawyered us. They played dirty pool, but they did it by changing the rules of the pool game so that they could catch us looking, okay? But whatever.
They changed the rules so that they could say they had played by the rules.
Yeah, sure, whatever. But either way, there's a large segment of the population that is, at least even now, years later, suspicious of what happened in 2020. And I'd say we were all suspicious in 2020. And this is really what this comes down to. some crimes, your motive, your frame of mind does not matter. It doesn't matter what you were thinking if you were drunk and you hit a school bus full of nuns. You should not have been drunk and driving. But then there are other crimes, like, for example, let's say I have a piece of Chris's property, or at least Chris believes I have a piece of his property, and he holds me down and he yanks that property out of my hands. Under normal circumstances, that is strong arm robbery. That is a felony. You can go to prison for that. Except Chris believed that the property was his. And that's sort of the crux of it here. If Donald Trump believed, oh, hold on a minute. This election looks suspicious as hell. If he actually believed that, well, it's not fraud. And that's and this is the biggest comment I wanted to make. That for me is kind of the scariest thing about this. It's never rung more true when Donald Trump would say things like, they're not after me, they're after you, I'm just in the way. This is one of those times where it really feels like it, because I am not ashamed to admit that even now, years later, I have suspicions about the 2020 election. But gosh, if having federal indictments leveled against me for taking those suspicions past a certain point is the result, man, maybe I just won't tell you what my suspicions are anymore. And if there's any way to pursue any type of action to rectify what those suspicions are, I certainly won't do that, because I don't want to get accused of more obstruction and everything else that Donald Trump is being hit with. It's very upsetting.
Now, what you said, so couple things. The first thing you said about the kind of three different positions, one of them being that Joe Biden got the most votes. I want you to understand something, guys. The people that believe that Joe Biden won the election with 80 million votes, they necessarily believe that every voter available to vote and registered to vote voted, which is a thing that has never happened, and then 10 million more voters showed up. Those are the numbers. There aren't that many voters. And then the other thing, Xander Mack points out, Jack Smith and the Dems are attempting to criminalize political dissent. It's insane. Exactly. That's why I started this episode with the thing about the preacher and the suppression of free speech. And we've talked about this on the show many, many times before. America is not the last free place in the world. It's the first free place ever. It is not the last bastion of freedom. It is the first beachhead of freedom. You look around the world, Great Britain, Canada, Australia, right? You look at the white Western world and anywhere outside of it, China, Zimbabwe, India, etc. Free speech only exists in the limited form that it still does in the United States. And that is eroding rapidly. That story about the preacher getting grabbed on the street, that's not the first, and it won't be the last. We had, I think it was Merrick Garland was testifying. He was asked about the why the protesters outside of abortion clinics were being arrested, who were protesting, and in several cases, they were simply standing outside abortion clinics and praying quietly, praying silently, and being arrested for that. While at the same time, firebombs are being thrown at pro-life centers, right? And no one's being arrested or prosecuted on that. And it couldn't have been Garland. Well, anyway, the interrogee was very clear. He said, well, you know, it was Garland. They wear black masks and do it at night. They're harder to catch. Oh, I see. So why didn't you arrest anybody that was protesting in front of the homes of the Supreme Court justices? who were in clear violation of the law, right? That falls under the reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. And no arrests there. It's clear selective enforcement. It's targeting. And like we've talked about on the show before, the absence of the existence of free speech in other places. You look at the situation in Canada, and it is the case that because of the way that the hate speech laws are structured, if the party in power changes, you can be prosecuted for hate speech for speaking political dissent against the party in power. So if the sacrifice your children to Moloch party gets voted in over the children are sacred and beautiful party, then suddenly don't murder your children is legally hate speech in Canada. And that's what they're looking to do here. Now, as far as the continued indictments, and that's another great point. I'm going to throw you one of these for that, Xander Mack. He was already acquitted of these charges during impeachment 1. This is just another news cycle grab. It's not just another news cycle grab, though. I'm going to argue with you on that point. It is not merely another news cycle grab. It is another piece of the election interference campaign. So think back to mid-2020, and we had that article, I believe it was from Time magazine, that detailed, we're going to steal the election, and this is how we're going to do it.
Fortify.
And they published that. And this is how we're going to do it. And we've had no end of political intellectuals come out and say that they're on the left. They wanted Joe Biden to win. They believe that the election was stolen by the Democrat National Party and the Biden campaign and the weaponized DOJ, etc., and that is the morally right thing to do, and that's how it should have been done, because Donald Trump is such a threat to our
democracy. God, right. I could go the rest of my life without ever hearing that. I see it on Twitter. I see it on Facebook. I hear it in what's left of left-wing YouTube. Yeah. Like, oh, it's the threat to our democracy. Oh, God. Tell me you're an NPC without telling me, oh, it's the threat to democracy. Ooh, it's the threat to democracy.
Hello, sir. I am a citizen in need of assistance.
There is, okay, so there's a couple of layers to it, though. If they throw enough criminal indictments at Donald Trump, eventually something ugly is going to stick. And I'm not saying that I think Trump is guilty of any of this, but I do have some unfortunate experience in our legal system, and one thing a good lawyer will tell you is, if you don't go to trial, you can't be found guilty. And that seems really, well, like, duh. However, it actually really matters, because as you've said before with the don't talk to cops thing, you can accidentally say something to the police, get you in a whole bunch of trouble.
No, yeah, my greatest concern about Donald Trump and these indictments is the fact that the man doesn't know when to shut up.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That is where I was going with it. Or at least part of where I was going with it. So if they throw enough of these things at him and count on Donald Trump's penchant for going, oh, you don't want me to say that? Well, screw you. I'll say it twice as loud. You know? And that's one of the things you like about him. However, it makes him a nightmare for a legal defendant. Like, can you picture his lawyers just going, oh, God, please shut up, please. Donnie, I love you. I'm charging you $2,000 an hour, but shut up. So that's the other thing of this. If you throw enough spaghetti at the wall, eventually some of those noodles stick.
Well, I don't know, man. Trump's lawyers might be looking at that situation and saying, wait, did he open his mouth again? That retainer just got stretched out another 5 years.
Yeah, Rhodey, I do follow Rob Reiner.
And he is a sociopath.
I also follow somebody else. Hint, hint, Steve, who doesn't follow me back. The bastard.
What the hell, man?
But no, just so that it doesn't get lost in the mud. Eventually, they throw enough of these things at Donald Trump, something will land.
Right. And here's what's going to happen there. I think Roseanne Barr might actually have the most cogent take on this now.
That was not on my 2023 bingo card.
And if I'm being fair, I think she got there the wrong way, but she still got to the right place. So Roseanne Barr and Michael Malice were on Timcast IRL the other night. Y'all, if you've never watched an episode of Timcast, go watch that one. It is hysterical. Roseanne, bless her, that woman is funny, right? There's a lot of criticism that could be heaped on that woman, but she is hilarious. And she's sitting there arguing with several guys who are very, very politically savvy and intelligent. And she just out of nowhere says, I don't think there's going to be an election next year. And she and Michael Malice actually shook on a bet, $1,000, whether or not there's going to be an election next year. And then this indictment comes down, and all of a sudden it's, oh, hold on. Okay, so this indictment literally says that what Trump is guilty of, according to the indictment, is having lawyers who gave him political advice, and we're going to call that a conspiracy, and then saying things he believed to be true. Because I can tell you this. No intelligent person can make a cogent argument that Donald Trump believes that he lost the 2020 election. This indictment hinges on the argument that Donald Trump lied about the results of the election. You cannot intelligently argue that Donald Trump's ego has allowed him to believe that he lost an election, which by all metrics leading up to the election, he should have won handily. You cannot say that he lied without being disingenuous.
Well, and there's a time factor as well. Like the election happens in November, and then just a short 2 months later in January, the transfer of power occurs. So if you think somebody pulled some funny business, well, you've only got about 60 days.
Right. And you remember how all that went. There were lawsuits filed, and first they would file the lawsuit, and the judge would say, well, you don't have any standing because the results haven't been announced yet, right? That was like the first 2 weeks. No, you have to wait for the results to be announced. And
so I have to wait for it to be too late. And then you could file the lawsuit. And then the results were announced, and they said, no, it's too late. The results have already been announced. You can't file a lawsuit anymore. Like, okay, just so we're clear for 2024, can you identify the exact 17 3/4 second window that I can squeeze this lawsuit into? Because the law says I could do it at some point, right? But now the point is nebulous and a moving target. That's absurd. But let me get back to Roseanne for a minute, because here's what I meant about her getting to the right place the wrong way. Roseanne was saying that there's not going to be an election in 2024, and she got there by thinking that Joe Biden is such a tyrant that he's essentially just going to declare martial law and shut down the elections. What?
There just won't be elections.
I never even knew a guy named Marshall. It was Corn Pop.
But what it looks like there's a real serious risk of is that we get past the primary. It's Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, right? Your choice becomes between using U.S. taxpayer dollars to start World War III, collapse the U.S. economy, shut down U.S. energy infrastructure, and begin and expand child trafficking operations, or cheap gas and world peace. I mean, tough call, right? But we're gonna get there, and it'll be down to the ticket is Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. And then Donald Trump will not be removed from the ticket entirely. He won't be completely taken off the election. He'll be removed from the ballot in 1 or 2 states. if that happens, if it happens that Donald Trump is removed from the ballot in one or two states after the primaries are already over, then no reasonable person could intelligently argue that what we had was a legitimate election. That's the objective. That's what all these indictments are about. It is, in fact, like El Rushbo told us over and over again, the case that the Democrats want to do away with elections entirely. And this is how they're going to do it. They're going to wait till there's two people on the ballot, and then they're just going to remove one.
Well, and it has the disenfranchising effect as well. Like, how many people do you know personally? Because I know of at least two people personally that in the 2021 special election that gave us basically two Democrat senators out of Georgia. How many people do you know that said, well, the 2020 election was such bullshit, I'm not going back and voting for the special election. Whatever happens, happens.
More than I'd like to admit.
Yeah, exactly. So there's the because they're never going to outright cancel elections. There will always be an election.
I don't know. This feels like a slow walk in that direction.
No. You can't. It's they'll never outright cancel the. Come on, man. North Korea has elections.
They have huge elections. In Bukhan, Jugmin, Gugui. Dong.
Yeah, I mean, they'll always have elections. But, it goes back to really the point that Andrew Mack said earlier in the show. Like, this really is about chilling dissent. That is exactly what this is about. Because there was all that time and, frankly, shame. It's like, well, how dare you question this election? What's wrong with you? I'm just trying to understand how Joe Biden needed to win these 6 states to guarantee his victory over Donald Trump. And
those are the only ones that seem to have broken water mains.
And those happen to be a lot of the same. Why is it that every state that got called on election night stayed the same fucking way it was called on election night, red or blue? But these 6 states, I'm just asking questions,
I'm just asking questions.
But you can't ask those questions. And then, of course, we go through the whole rigmarole with January 6th, a thing I was even temporarily confused by. It turned out, at worst, it was a white people riot. And if you're offended by that, fuck off. So then we have all that. And again, with the how dare you and the January 6th and oh my God, it was an insurrection. Oh, it was so scary for our democracy. And now here we are again. With, Donald Trump actually led this whole, because I read about half the indictment, y'all. I didn't get through the whole thing. I was A, at work, and B, I hate reading legalese. I mean, with like the passion of 1,000 burning suns, I'd literally rather read stereo assembly instructions than legal documentations. The legal documents, I hate them. But,
I'm sorry. Xander Mack, everything they do, every move they make is about chilling dissent, vaccine dissent, political dissent, gender dissent, climate dissent. Absolutely. And it, like the gender dissent thing, right? They're going out of their way to chill gender dissent by prescribing puberty blocking hormones to young men in hopes to stop their balls from dropping.
But
gender dissent.
Yes, I got it. I was just trying to punch it in.
I just couldn't dodge that pun.
Okay. But now here we are, and they're actually saying, and they've even included stuff that happened on January 6th, See, now that it's not convenient to make the protesters, or I'll even go so far as to call them rioters on January 6th, the villains, because it's no longer politically convenient. No. Now they're saying Donald Trump deliberately manipulated the January 6th situation and took advantage of the violence on January 6th in order to forward his own fraudulent claims. And I think most people that can put their emotions aside can think and say, no, that's really not what happened. The tensions in the country were at an absolute fever pitch at that point in time, and maybe things got a little out of control. But this was not some grand conspiracy. Donald Trump didn't go, ooh, let's have a riot on the Capitol. I'll totally get to remain president if there's a riot on the Capitol. Like, really think about this, people. How much sense does that make? But my reading of the indictment says that's what's in it. Donald Trump, he's like, woo, riot. All right, I'm going to win. I just need a little more riot. And I'll end on this. The left is the master of projection. Because who is it that wants riots to affect political change?
Well, based on their explicit assertions, that would be AOC, Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters. I can go on. I just literally name them all. And I can find a video clip of them saying explicitly, we need more of this. And my closing statement here, I'm going to tag Unverified Bear real quick. Says, I didn't used to mind that they took God out of society. When I realized they were actively replacing him with Satan, I started to pay attention. I was listening to one of my books the other day, and in it, the main character he's a great character. It's a little confusing because the character is actually a socialist from Australia, and he goes on these moral tirades throughout the first book. And then by the end of the first book, he's put in positions where, and this is a 9-book series, by the end of the first book, he's put in positions where he's forced to try and apply his socialism morality in various ways, and it fails. And he's confronted with the practical application of my moral stance is destructive and psychotic. And there's a chapter early on entitled Waving the Flag for Secular Morality. So sometime in the near future, and this will probably either be, no show on Monday. I'll get to that later. Not much later, we're done. But there's no such thing as secular morality. I'm going to do a show on this probably next Tuesday. And I'll make the case and explain that, yes, it is impossible, right? The phrase secular morality is an oxymoron. It does not exist. And so we'll get to that. Unverified Bear asks, name of the book. It's an audio book. I listened to it on Audible, and it's called He Who Fights with Monsters. Fantastic series. Very funny. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and put a button in it there. We're good?
Yeah.
We're good. We love you. We will see you tomorrow.